Okay, so greetings class. In this recording, we're going to talk about Merrill's principles of instruction and technology-enhanced learning. Now, as the title can suggest, these are also frameworks and of course the newer trends when we are learning hand in hand with technology or with the help of technology as an instructional aid. Okay? So, of course, marami naman na tayo nalaman na iba't ibang framework tungkol dyan. However, Merrill is one of this particular frameworks that we also need to learn. Okay? So, you will see in this module that in 2002, David Merrill, he basically published a theory that emphasized that learning must observe 5 principles. So, kung naaalala nyo last time, we talked about Gagne's 9 events of instruction. So, sabi ni Gagne doon, dapat itong 9 events na to ay present for effective learning. Now, David Merrill, or simply Merrill, also has his own 5 events or principles that needs to be present in a particular classroom. So this particular figure 1 shows an overview of the principle of instruction according to Merrill. So in the center you can see their task, then integration, activation, demonstration, and application, and it is presented in a circular manner. Okay? So, itong mga nakalagay dito sa gilid, actually, we're going to talk about that later in the recording. As is said in the figure, this is only an overview. So, ano ba yung 5 kailangan nating tandaan from the get-go? Una, is that learning is promoted when learners are engaged in real-world problems. You start with the small problems going to more complex ones, meaning that the learners should be exposed not to knowledge, or at least not to simply facts, but rather the use of facts and learning in order to solve a particular problem. Problems which range from the most basic up until the more complex. Next one is learning is promoted when existing or pre-existing knowledge is activated. Okay? So, maaari nyo ipasok dito yung tenets of constructivism. If you remember, constructivism uses prior learning and connects them with new learning. Okay? Now, the idea there is that when old and remembered learning is connected with new ones, the retention levels are increased for the new learning as more and more connections are strengthening the bond or is closing the gap between the old and new one. Okay? Now, the third principle or the third overview here is that learning should be done through demonstration. Meaning, ayaw ni Merrill gumamit ng lecture method. So as much as possible daw, you should demonstrate what you are teaching in order for students to have an idea of just exactly how a particular idea is utilized in solving a problem or when used in the real world scenario. Okay? Next, so another one here, learning is promoted if it is applied, meaning that as teachers, you should have avenues for students to apply their knowledge through different means. Mga means na pag-uusapan natin just a bit later. And finally, another principle is that learning is promoted when knowledge is integrated in the world. Meaning that the lesson that they have learned should have practical and feasible uses in their real world in order for students to actually consider them as, of course, worthwhile to learn. Because again, if we do not consider something worthwhile to learn, chances are we'll never actually learn it. So, yes, those are, is a very short overview. So, let's dive right in kung ano ba talaga itong mga parts na ito. Actually, may phases pa yung bawat parts according to IDA or Instructional Design Australia. So, as we have talked about earlier, the first principle of instruction in Merrill's principle is the problem or task principle. Okay? So, it states here in this principle that we should open a learning episode with a real-world problem. So, in a way, para siyang problem-based learning wherein you start with a problem and potentially end with solving the problem. Now, meron daw mga phases itong principle na ito. So, the first one is to show the task. Meaning, you are going to show an example of the problem or the task you want your students to perform. Okay? Maaari ka magbigay ng examples. Okay? Maaari kang gumawa or maaari kang magpakita as a warm-up para sa mga bata. Okay? Para may idea lang sila kung ano yung gusto mong maabot nila. Okay? Next is yung task level. According here, we have to ensure learners are engaged at the task levels as well as the operation or action level. Okay? So what it means here by the operation or action level is that your students should be able to decipher which particular actions or processes you have done in solving the task or in doing the task that you have just shown them. Okay? Because technically, when we are solving a problem, merong process na sinusunod. Okay? So what they want to show you or what they want to remind teachers is that in order for a student to perform a task or to solve a problem, the students must be engaged with the steps. Okay? And then the third one is the problem progression. Now, yung ipapakita mo kasi sa kanila na task, it's simply a basic task. Okay? Ang gusto mo ay maabot nila yung basic level, basic problem solving or basic performance, and pag naabot nila yon, you're going to go further. You're going to present complex or more complex problems and more complicated tasks in order to elevate their learning. And of course, while doing that, you also have to provide scaffolding to your learners. Okay? Meaning that if you want them to achieve a higher level of learning, you must guide them slowly upward up until maabot nila yung zone of proximal development. Okay? So, what you see here in the paragraphs here are simple explanations of the phases I have just told you. Okay, let's just take note kung ano pa yung mga hindi natin nasabi. Okay? So, when you are showing that task, you must also show or you must also ensure that your students pay attention or that they have a small part in the demonstration. Because according to IDA, that promotes authentic learning. Because as we know or as we hypothesize, if students are engaged in learning, then the learning is much better compared to if they are not engaged. Okay? So, you can also show them complex problems. Meaning, kahit nag-start ka sa basic, pwede mo agad ipakita sa kanila ano yung mga susunod nyo pang gagawin after nyo nagawa yung basics. Okay? So, problems can take on many forms. So it can be a simulated scenario. But the more important thing is that when you present a problem, it should be a problem that is based on the real world or based on experiences that your students have actually faced. Okay? That's the idea kasi. If the problem is relatable, then chances are your students might invest more emotional resources in solving the problem. Okay? Actually, yun yung nakasabi. Yun yung actually ini-state ni Mozuto in 2009. Because, again, if your learners can connect the relevant experience to the problem, they can solve the problem better. Okay? Because, of course, meron silang idea eh. They can collect data not only from themselves, but from other sources as well. Okay? So, next, let's talk about here the focus on learner development. Okay? So, when you're actually talking about problem-based learning, the focus there is giving your student the skills to solve a particular problem. But still, the end goal there is that you want to solve a problem. But Merrill states that when you teach in instruction, your focus should not be on solving problems. So, yun yung pinagkaiba actually ng principle ni Merrill sa pagsunod sa striktong problem-based learning. Okay? Because Merrill wants to focus simply on the development and utilization of the skills of learners. These skills can be their problem-solving skills, analytical skills, of course, kasali doon yun sa problem-solving skills, creative thinking skills, and of course, yung kanilang initiative. Okay? So again, if you present a problem, your goal is not to solve a problem, but to develop the skills that are necessary in solving the basic problems, and of course, the skills that are needed to be improved for your students to solve more complex problems. So, yun yung ating problem or task principle. Next is yung ating activation principle. Okay? So, this principle states that prior knowledge must be used to provide a complete learning experience. So, ano yung mga phase na iyon? First, you recall previous experience. You can ask your students, you can interview them, you can have them do an activity, all in the efforts of surfacing the existing knowledge and experience that are relevant to the new experience. Okay? The second phase would be to give them the new experience. Okay? So, when you are teaching, it says here that you need to ensure that tasks are engaging, interesting, and authentic. Because you want your students to get new experiences. So, na-activate na yung previous experience nila, nakakuha na sila ng bagong experience, the only thing left to do is to connect these two experiences. And yun actually the third phase of the problem. The connection between the previous and new experience should allow your learners to tackle on more complex problems or tasks related to the newly formed connections. Okay? So, yung connection na yun, gagamitin mo para, of course, makaperform yung students. Okay? So, ano pa yung ibang sinasabi dito? Okay? So, Merrill in 2011 outlined several details in the activation principle. Okay? So, una, sabi nga natin kanina, learning is promoted when relevant experiences is activated. Again, we activate them by talking to our students, continuous questioning methods, activities, and reviews. Of course, meron pang ibang mga paraan to do that, but that depends on the teacher. Okay? Learners are directed to recall their knowledge that is used as a foundation for new knowledge. Because that is actually the goal of recalling previous information, to serve as the bridge that would connect your mind, your long-term memory, to the new knowledge that you have achieved. Kasi when you're recalling, you're tapping on your long-term memory. Yung mga old experiences mo, andun na sa long-term memory. The goal of learning is to put yung new knowledge into your long-term memory. And to do that, huhugot ka ng experiences na naka-embed na or na nakabaon na agad sa iyong long-term memory para mag-connect sila. Okay? Actually, parang naulit to eh. Provided. So, hindi pa siya naulit. Because there are learners that do not have the relevant experiences that you want to activate. In these instances, it is the prerogative of teachers to provide these experiences themselves. Okay? We can do that by giving them an activity. Okay? Usually, yun yung pinaka-effective. Because yung mga learners na walang relevant experience, through interactive activities, they have a first-hand simulated experience, which is actually a whole lot better than nothing. Okay? And of course, you can also use this opportunity to gauge your students and to get their attention and to even motivate them through allowing them to demonstrate their previous knowledge. So kung sa mathematics, pwede mo silang pag-solvein sa board ng mga previous problems. Kung sa English, you can have them recite a poem or say a passage, a literary passage or a fact that will be related to your new knowledge. This small activities or small opportunities that you give them can go a long way in motivating and in showing or also engaging your students. Okay? So, yun yung mga kailangan nating alalahanin sa activation principle. Okay? Next, we have the demonstration principle. Now, as we said earlier, ayaw ni Merrill ng lecture method. Okay? Ang gusto niya is to demonstrate and to use media that shows the effectiveness of these methods. Okay? So, with that, With that, let's talk about the phases in the demonstration principle. So there are 3 phases as well according to IDA. Next is the demonstration consistency. Okay. When we're talking about the consistency, of course, you're going to select a media that is relevant in solving the problem you have presented or the lesson you will present. I think that can be said as a common sense. Okay? Kasi hindi ka pwedeng gumamit ng media. Okay? Hindi ka pwedeng gumamit ng problems na wala namang connection sa mga lesson na ituturo mo. Okay? It's like, what do you call this? It's like throwing a dart and then missing like a whole lot away. Okay? Next is the learner guidance. So while you are showing relevant materials, And while you are demonstrating the use of these materials, you should also guide your learners. For example, nagamit ka ng materials na magbibigay ng copy sa iba't ibang bata. Sa atin ngayon, di ba? Yung mga students natin, meron sila mga soft copy ng PowerPoint. Okay? Kung PowerPoint yung gagamitin natin. So, it is also your duty to show them kung paano gamitin yon. Lalo na pag bagong media yan. Hindi naman tayo lahat ay magaling sa PowerPoint. Okay? I do remember that a lot of you are still having problems opening a PDF file. And of course, we provide guidance when we can. Of course, kasama rin dito yung pag-intindi ng mga idea, ng concept, at ng mga perspectives that are inside the media that you are presenting. Okay? As we have known earlier, in the 21st century skills, kapag meron kang fact, you present the fact and facts alone. Be as comprehensive with the facts as much as possible to avoid subjectivity. Okay? Or kung yan man ay opinion or very subjective, you have to state how it is interpreted, how it is utilized, or how it is viewed in the lesson. Because again, kapag yan ay subject to many different interpretations, maaaring malito yung bata alin sa mga interpretations ang ginamit ni teacher. Alin sa mga implications yung gustong i-imply ni teacher. So, kailangan mo maglagay ng guidance on that part. Next, relevant media. Ensure media supports effective learning. Okay? What I can say about this is when you are teaching, it is always better to keep up with the development of content creation or media creation. Nowadays, we are very much dependent on technology. Hence, the type of media we will be using can largely be digital in nature. But of course, whenever possible, you should use tangible or more interactive and technically, what do you call this? For lack of a better word, mga media na nahahawakan at namamanipulate. Manipulatives pala yung tawag doon. Okay? Media that they can actually manipulate through different senses. Okay? So, additionally, Merrill suggested that there are different types of demonstrations that we can use. So, meron tayong mga general demonstration. The first one is yung tinatawag na kinds of. Okay? Now, these examples may be in the same scenario or in the same concept. Okay? If you're talking about the Renaissance work, one must say an example of one of these artworks and say its distinct characteristics. Okay. Technically, what it says here, if you're going to use kinds of, okay, what you're going to do is to find a connection between the different outputs or the different media that are used in learning a particular content. Okay? Sorry. So, for example, you're talking about, what do you call this? You're talking about World War II. Okay? Now, if you're going to talk about World War II and gusto mong gumamit ng kinds of, you're going to give other examples of wars. You're going to talk about what these wars have in common, what the causes are, and what the forces are doing. Technically, okay, you use this kind of media to find or to extract a particular concept. Okay, the concept of what do you call this? The concept of objects in a group. So yun yung kinds of. Okay? Actually, nakalagay rin naman pala dito. Examples related to the problem. So, yun yung gagawin mo. When you're demonstrating kinds of, magbibigay ka pa ng iba pang mga examples that are, of course, similar to your problem. Now, how to refers to ito actually in demonstrating the problem. You're going to show how a particular task is done, how a particular material is used, how a particular equipment can be utilized, and how a problem occurs and is solved. Okay? So, sa mathematics, actually, ito yung ginagamit natin naman madalas when it comes to mathematics. Okay? Even in values. Diba? If we're trying to follow a particular law, we show our students how to follow the law. Okay? Usually sa mga younger learners, ginagawa din natin to, yung pagbigkas ng alphabet. Diba? Class, ganito, pagbigkas ng A, B. Diba? A, B, C, nakalimutan ko na actually yun eh. It's been a very long time ago. Okay? Nonetheless, if you're going to use these kinds of demonstration, it requires you to focus on your learners and their attention to the examples you are giving. Because your focus here is that your learners should be able to follow the correct process. The correct process and procedure. Okay? Next is what happens. Okay? This is used when students have learned the underlying concept. So yung what happens, okay, or yung process learning, this can only be done when your students have already learned the basics of problem solving. Because what you're doing when you're using these kinds of demonstration is to test your students in exhausting, in extracting, and analyzing the connections between different facts. Okay? So, ito na yung mga tinatawag natin na HOTS, di ba? Kung saan gagamitin na talaga natin isip natin to get yung pinaka-generalization. Okay? Or di naman kaya yung reflection. This happens when you ask your students, why does this work? Why does this particular solution work? Why is this event happening? These types of questions are an analogy of the demonstrations under what happens. Okay? Now, of course, Merrill again emphasized the relevance of media. Okay? Kasama na rin dito yung peer discussion. Okay? So, media and peer discussions should be used hand in hand with one another. Okay? Yung materials na gagamitin mo for learning should again be relevant to the lesson. Kung magtuturo ka ng Shakespearean literature, yung media mo obviously ay mga plays ni Shakespeare maybe. Okay? Yung itsura, yung society nung kapanahunan niya, that can also be used. You certainly cannot use something that is very much on the modern age unless these are works that are derived from Shakespearean literature. But again, it depends on a teacher, but as much as possible, if you're simply showing, you make it as accurate and as relevant as possible. Wala mo na mga derivatives. Okay? And of course, yung peer discussion. Ang peer discussion, that's actually very literal. When classmates are talking with one another to discuss the lesson that you have taught. Okay? So, teachers do this, of course, to get the students' reaction. ala, naiintindihan ba nila yung pinag-uusapan nila? Halit tama ba yung pinagtatanungan nila, yung pinagchichikahan nila doon sa likod? Okay? This is actually a fun activity when you can actually facilitate it better. Marami po tayong mga paraan dyan, yung mga round robin, four corners. Okay? Ano pa ba yung ibang tawag doon? Brainstorming. Again, if you want your students to be involved with one another, they should also require supervision because chances are baka baka maligaw sila or baka maging unruly sila if your learners are young learners. Okay? So Merrill also gave us key details in the demonstration principle. So merong 4. Okay? So ito na yung sinabi natin kanina. Learning is promoted when learners observe a demonstration. Okay? A demonstration that is consistent with the content being taught. Meaning, again, if you're going to teach something, you should teach it through demonstration that is relevant with the content. Okay? Next, learners should be guided to relate to general information and to organize specific instances. Okay, so dalawang task to actually. Una, you're guiding your learners to get yung tinatawag na general information, meaning a generalization on the content that you have taught. Meaning, kasama dito yung pag-intindi, pag-guide sa kanila on what the scopes of the content are. So sa mathematics, when we're talking about what do you call this? When we're talking about algebra, okay? The general view there is algebra is used in different media, especially when you're talking about unknown variables. Okay? That's a general information. Now, when we are tasked with guiding our students organize specific instances, ang tawag dito ay inductive learning. Technically, you want them to build a particular generalization from specific ideas. Itong what do you call this? Itong fractions. They're not whole numbers. Itong decimal, hindi rin whole numbers. Now, is there a connection between fractions and decimals? Okay, now from two specific knowledge, the knowledge on fraction, the knowledge on decimal, you guide them to create a particular connection. These numbers can be generalized into a single group. The group that we can say are unwhole numbers or fractals. So again, that shows two different knowledge being organized into a particular generalization. That's called inductive learning. Okay? Next, peer discussion and peer demonstration. Mga bata should be involved with the demonstration. We do this through activities, obviously. Okay? So as much as possible daw, bigyan natin ng avenue yung mga bata para mag-usap, para mag-discuss amongst themselves. Because some knowledge can be easily understood by one student but maaaring hindi maintindihan ng iba. Okay? At yung hindi nakakaintindi, maaaring takot kausapin ka. Mas gusto niya nang kausapin yung kanyang peer. Okay? At chances are, baka matuto rin siya sa peer niya. That's the importance of peer discussion. Try as we might, teachers cannot be on the same level with their students. And some students learn better when they are talking with someone on their same level. Mga no holds barred, ganon. Hindi nahihiyang magtanong. Okay, sana all may right med. Anyway, moving on. Learning from demonstration is enhanced through observation of media. Okay, meaning that when we are teaching, it is important to use audio visual, or even what do you call this, multi-sensory media. Okay, so we cannot teach just by talking alone. You should also enforce it through the use of relevant materials. So that's the demonstration phase. Actually, ito yung teaching phase kung i-consider mo. Next is yung application phase. Okay? So meron tayong tatlo ulit sa application phase. So, ano ba yung mga important details dito sa application phase? As the word suggests, this is when your learners are required to use the knowledge they are in the process of acquiring. Okay? Meaning, dito na nila gagawin. Or dito na nila i-perform yung action. Okay? Next. So, sa details, ang sabi ni Merrill, learning is promoted when learners apply their knowledge in problems that are consistent with the content. Okay? Obviously, when you want your students to apply their learning, yung mga performance na gagawin nila dapat ay related sa itinuro mo. Kung adding fractions, or alimbawa, kung pagsasayaw, yung tinuro mo, dapat yung application ay pagsasayaw din. Hindi ka pwedeng magpa-apply sa kanila ng pen and paper test na hindi naman sila sasayaw. It may be relevant, but it's not consistent. Because you want them to perform. You do not want them to simply remember kung anong pangalan ng steps ay ito, waltz to. No, you don't want that. You want them to perform, and perform they will do. Okay? Next. Learning is improved if, and only if, they receive feedback. Feedback that are intrinsic and corrective. Meaning constructive feedback. Hindi ka pwedeng magbigay ng destructive feedback. Okay? That's actually the biggest no when it comes to teaching, giving destructive feedbacks. So again, this highlights the importance of your words that are absorbed by your learners. Next, coaching. Okay? So when we say coaching, dito na papasok yung scaffolding. Dito na papasok yung guided learning. Okay? Because students, when they are only applying it for the first time, chances are medyo rough pa yung kanilang skills. Hence, you guide them. Ito. Baka kailangan nating baguhin tong step na to. May mali kang na-add dito. Parang may mali ka sa paggamit ng sentence na to. Okay? Parang dito yung definition medyo redundant or medyo very conflicting. Okay? These types of feedbacks actually lead or actually guide your student to perform or to correct their performances. And we must do that until such time na kaya na nilang gawin sa sarili nila. Hindi natin sila pwedeng i-guide forever. Okay? They must learn to do it on their own. Okay? We guide them up until maabot nila yung goal na iyon. And of course, andun pa rin yung peer collaboration. Again, hindi mawawala yung peer collaboration. Kaya minsan, pag nagtatawag si madam, dalawa yung tinatawag niyo. Ikaw, at si ikaw, pagtulungan nyo i-solve. Okay? Because again, the advantages of peer collaboration is its ability to self-correct one another. Okay? So, let's move on to the phases. Okay? So, sabi dito, practice consistency. Meaning, hindi lang isang beses nila dapat i-perform. They must perform it in multiple ways, especially if the skill you want them to achieve is complex in nature. Okay? So, yun. Para ma-practice, para mahasa. Next is to diminish coaching. Okay? So, as I said earlier, hindi natin pwedeng lagi silang i-coach. Dapat dumating din sa point na kaya nilang gawin yon mag-isa. Hence, paunti ng paunti yung ating coaching time habang nakaka-build sila ng independence. Okay, next is varied problems. Hindi lang pwedeng paulit-ulit yung pinapagawa mo sa kanila, pinapasolve mo sa kanila, yung pinapasulat mo sa kanila. It should also have them practice how they implement this knowledge in different ways. Okay? Kung magpapasolve ka ng algebra, try mo gumamit ng fractions. Try mong gumamit ng word problems. Okay? Etc. Etc. Providing them with different ways to actually showcase their learning. Okay? So, the next ones here are for you to read. Technically, actually, yan lang yung mga details na nasabi ko kanina. Okay? So, basahin nyo na lang. Okay. And next, we have the integration phase. Okay? What you need to remember here is students' reflection. Okay? Now, our reflection, according to Merrill, is important for meaningful discussion. It allows a student to defend their own learning, to refine it, okay? To refine it through the elimination of misconception and to increase the flexibility in using this skill. Okay, so madami. Una, meaningful discussion. Meaning this reflection should allow your students to talk to others about their own learning. Okay? Allows them to share their experience. And of course, to defend yung kanilang skills. Meaning, if your students reflect on a particular learning, chances are they would know, ito yung alam ko. Ito yung pinaka na-gets ko sa tinuro ni sir. Ito yung hindi ko ma-gets. Paano ko kaya i-improve? So, that kind of reflection allows them to identify saan ako mahina, saan ako malakas, saan yung medyo nalilito ako, at saan ko pa magagamit yung learning. All of this metacognition is important for students to integrate their learning in real life. Because pag alam mo yung strengths and weaknesses mo, then you know how to get better. And when you get better at skills that require you to, when you get better at real life skills, then there is greater chances of integration of those skills. Okay? So, ano yung details dito? Una, they should integrate their new knowledge in everyday life. Okay? So, how do they integrate it? They reflect, they discuss, or they defend their new skill. Okay? So, kailangan daw, para matutong mabuti yung bata, bigyan mo sila ng avenue para gamitin. Or at least, show them. Okay, class, itong algebra pwede yung magamit pag kayo mamamalengke. Or pag kayo, as teachers, when you are being taught in mathematics in the modern world, you're being taught algebra. Okay? And you know that you will use algebra in solving the grades of your learners. Okay? Hence, that shows you an avenue to integrate your skill. Next is peer critic. So, kanina peer discussion, ngayon peer critic na. Okay? Meaning, this is the phase where this is the principle where your students should be able to critique one another. Okay? Critique not in a destructive way, but in a constructive way. Of course, as a teacher, it is your job to facilitate it kasi minsan baka maging spicy yung peer critic. Next, students must have creativity in using their knowledge. Okay? So again, that is for you to provide. Minsan, napro-provide natin to kapag gumagamit tayo ng outcomes-based learning. If your students are allowed to make a creative outcome or output which requires them to use their skill. Kaya minsan, pag nagpapa-project tayo, di ba meron dun creativity. So that's one way of observing the integration principle. And of course, learning is promoted when students are able to publicly demonstrate. Okay, so sa iba, medyo mahirapan sila kasi introvert sila or hindi sila sanay sa tao. Okay, however, students should still show their skill. Okay, so ano ba yung phases nito? Okay, una is watch me. Meaning, you provide opportunities for learners to show their skill. So parang sa application, but this time around, you're simply going to watch. Okay? You might not need to put feedback. Basta panoorin mo lang sila. Okay? Next is yung reflection. Okay? Meaning, you are going to extract what your students learned or what your students think about their learning or even about the fact itself. Okay? Because once they have recognized that reflection, then they will know, ito pala yung mga natutunan ko. Ito pala yung mga kulang ko. And of course, mababasa mo rin yun as teacher. So, you'll know what to teach next. And of course, yung content creation. Your students should be able to create something new with what they have learned. So, are there anything else? Well, technically, wala naman na. Yun yung ating integration principle. So, ano yung sinasabi ng iba? Okay, this one talks about the reflection and the sharing of opinion. Again, your students, in order for them to integrate their learning, they should be able to use it in real life. Okay? The next one is for peer learning and peer critic. Again, your students, they should act as, what do you call this? A helping hand with one another. Helping hand in terms of improving their own skills and maximizing their limits. Okay? So, this next paragraph shows about the strength or the appropriate use of the principles. So, ano ba yung sabi niya dito? So, as si Merrill pala yung nag-comment pala nito, okay? There is a need for instruction. Okay? So, this type of principles cannot be done without an instructor. Obviously, kaya nga tinawag na Merrill's principles of teaching. You cannot do it without a teacher. Okay? And with that, dapat meron ka ding set of instructions na ituturo. Okay? Next. Okay? Next is that your instruction needs to change when students achieve a higher degree. Meaning that if your students, halimbawa, yung problem na binigay mo, madaling na-solve ng estudyante. Ang gagawin ko? You provide them a new and more complex problem. Okay? As Merrill said, this would raise the bar in learning. Kasi, mas mataas na yung starting point mo. Ibig sabihin, mas madali na nilang marireach yung gusto mong ma-reach nilang level. Okay? Next is that the students play a huge role. As you have probably observed, yung application and yung integration method, they require your students to be active. Not only in themselves, but in the class. Kaya yung ibang mga estudyante mo na maaaring introvert or ayaw sa group learning, maaaring maging disadvantageous. So, it is for you to decide which particular activities to implement just in case this happens. And next, this theory is most useful for reflective learning dahil hindi nawawala dito yung integration. Now, some of you may notice na yung mga bagong framework in education or in depth ed, meron lagi yung reflection. Because again, reflection shows what learnings your student has aside from evaluation, of course. Okay? And then this last paragraph says that the strength and weakness lies on the students, meaning that this theory would fail if the teacher fails to get student interaction. Okay? So, yun, be mindful that if you want to use this theory, make sure that your materials are catching, make sure that you can actually sustain student attention. Mahirap na yan gawin nowadays. Okay? Dahil yung ibang research sinasabi pababa yung ating attention span. And with that, when that happens, education becomes harder. Now, what I posted here is a link to David Merrill's rationale in education. So it is worthwhile to watch what the man himself wants to say when he is talking about his principles. So that is Merrill's principles of instruction. So next, we move on to technology-enhanced learning. Now, as the word suggests, technology-enhanced learning changed how learning proceeds in a classroom. Meaning that today's learning and teaching cannot exist without technology. Okay? Kaya ngayon, we have no choice but to base learning or but to integrate technology in learning. So, sabi ni Cullen in 2018, meron daw tayong 4 na reason kung bakit natin kailangan i-integrate yung technology sa learning. Una, learners are learning at their own pace. Meaning that with technology, yung learners, hindi na natin kailangang i-rush or pabagalin. With the resources available to them, they can easily access the learning whenever they want at their own speed. Okay? Ngayon, mag-YouTube ka lang. Diba? Matututunan mo na isang bagay. Pause kapag nabibilisan ka. Speed up kapag nababagalan ka. Skip pag alam mo na yung part na to. These types of resources are possible with technology, and dahil nga doon, ginagamit na natin technology for learning because it allows learners to learn at their own pace. Next, abundant resources. As the word suggests, when we're talking about the internet, we're talking about almost unlimited information. Meaning, yun nga, your students have the key, have the access to this information, which gives them the resources or the means to explore learning on their own. So kapag may hindi ka alam, as a teacher, it's okay. You task your students to search it on their own, especially if they are very much interested in the lesson. Okay? So with technology, it's possible to do that. Next, technology improves interaction. Just imagine if technology is not invented and nagka-pandemic. Learning would be halted. Walang kahit anong interaction between student and teachers. But with technology, it has allowed us to still continue education even with the pandemic happening. And with using technology in classroom, this allows you to explore different interactions. Okay? Kung dati sa board, kukunti lang na mga estudyante yung nagsusulat or makakasulat. Siguro mga 5 at a time yung maximum. Pag meron kang technology, Jamboard, all of the class may join. And that is a new, technically it's not new, but still, it's a very invigorating experience in the class. And of course, technology is needed in life. It's hard to imagine how you live without digital technology nowadays. It's very inconvenient. It's very, what do you call this? It's very cumbersome. But now, we're living in a technology world, and when you are out there, it requires you, life requires you to be able to use technology. So these are the 4 reasons given by Cullen on how we should enforce technology-enhanced learning in the classroom. Okay, so next we're going to talk about the approaches for technology-enhanced learning. Now, Walsh in 2014 listed several approaches. Actually, 8 yan. Una, student-created content. As the word suggests, students nowadays can create content on their own. Meaning, yun nga, makakagawa na sila ng mga output in a more efficient manner. Okay? Kung dati, kukunti lang yung nakakagawa. Pag nagpa-project ka, minsan yung iba nahihirapan kasi hindi sila magaling sa mga paggugupit, pag-paste, or pag-design. Ngayon, with technology, it allowed them to further improve their skills. Hence, the emergence of student-created content. Kaya nga ang ginagamit na natin ngayon ay outcomes-based education. You are required to make an outcome or an output. Okay? Next is collaborative learning. As the word suggests, technology allows us to communicate, hence, to learn with one another. Okay? So, yun po yung advantage or yung approach when we are using technology-enhanced learning. Let's take advantage of the communication that is afforded to us by technology. Next is active learning. When we're talking about active learning, this is not when your students are active in class, okay? This means that a curriculum or an instructional system is changing based on the needs of their learners. Meron po tayong mga instructional system na ganon. Okay? Nagtitake note, ay medyo nabagalan siya, ay dito yung mga mali niya. Okay? Pag prinogram mo, sabihin niya, read these materials first, or we suggest these materials. Actually, meron mga instructional system na ganon. Kaso, of course, medyo mamahalin. But nonetheless, it is a prospect that is possible. Pag nararamdaman ng technology or ng AI or ng program man ng technology na mabagal or may problema yung skill ng bata, magsasuggest siya ng other courses of learning para mas maging suitable sa learning style at sa learning skill ng bata. Yun yung active learning. Changing according to the needs of the learners. Okay? Of course, kaya itong gawin ng teacher. Medyo comprehensive or medyo mahirap nga lang. Next is personal learning network. Okay? So, meaning, your learners can now talk with experts or with a particular specific community regarding their learning. For example, I'm learning statistics. There are communities dedicated to talking about statistics. I can go to that community and ang tawag ko na doon ay personal learning network. Doon na ako natututo sa community na iyon. Okay? So, for example, if you're trying to sew, kayo maghahabi, practice ka maghabi, may community for that. If you're practicing drawing, may community for that. Pag nakita mo yung community na yon, you enter, you interact. And when you talk with them and you learn from them, they become your personal learning network. Okay? Next is mobile learning. Okay? Yung mga mobile phones natin ngayon, it allows us to learn wherever we are. We can bring learning to remote places, and at the same time, we can talk or we can learn from remote places as well. Okay, that's mobile learning. Next is competency-based learning. Okay? So when you say competency-based learning, dito na-amplify yung skills ng bata. Okay? So kung kayo, I know that you have some classmates na talagang very exceptional at one particular skill. Merong isang bata, sobrang galing mag-drawing, sobrang galing magsalita. Okay? Sobrang galing kumanta, sobrang galing mag-solve ng math, sobrang galing mag-articulate, sobrang galing sumayaw. Technology allows us to showcase these skills much more further, much broader, and of course, much more creative. Okay? If you're a dancer, pwede kang gumawa ng TikTok, pwede kang gumawa ng video. If you're a math learner, pwede kang magpakita ng mga proofs sa internet. If you are a writer, you can create your own output. You can make your own blog, etc., etc. And technology allows for that. Allows us to express and of course, to use our knowledge when transitioning from classroom environment to professional environment. Okay? Just give it a few years. Yung mga classmates nyo, makikita nyo na lang sa mga classrooms or sa ibang mga fields if they choose a different field. And yung skills nila on that field came from developing the skills in the classroom. That's competency-based learning. You aim to improve the best skills of your learners. Next is social learning. So as said here, kalapit siya sa collaborative learning. But ang collaborative learning, you talk, you work with one another to achieve a certain goal. Social learning, you work with one another to understand one another. So, papasok ka sa isang community in an effort to understand that community. Okay? Nagagawa for very useful to sa marketing. Okay? If you're a marketing agent, okay, you want to enter a particular community, then you interact with them. Tatanungin mo, ano yung madalas yung ginagamit, ano yung madalas yung pinapanood, ano yung pinaka-hobby ninyo. And all of this information allows you to learn about the community. Okay? And it allows you to make better decisions, or it allows you to craft a plan to interact better or to market to that community. Okay? Usually very useful to sa social sciences, obviously, when you are learning about a particular society. Okay? So that's social learning. 8 is flipped classroom. Ito yung pinakasikat dati, ewan ko lang ngayon. Actually, ginagawa pa rin siya ngayon. It's very convenient. Flipped classroom is basically lahat ng learning ginagawa sa bahay. Yung pag-practice ng sayaw, pagsosolve ng problem. Ibibigay lahat ng resources sa'yo, bibigyan ka ng mga recordings, or even i-guide ka synchronously at your home, and then pupunta ka lang sa school to have your assessment. Doon ka mag-exam, doon ka mag-quiz. Pero lahat ng learning sa bahay. Okay? Yun yung flipped classroom. If you look at it at an economic way, this is very convenient for the school kasi hindi siya gaanong gagamit ng mga classroom. Okay? Ang pinaka-problema lang, of course, is yung resources. Okay? So, flipped classroom is a very appealing to administrators. And of course, if performed well, it allows your students to have a better grasp of their time and to improve their independent learning. Kasi nga, natututo na sila on their own. Bigyan mo na resources, they learn. Okay? But again, that is only if flipped classroom is done correctly. Okay? So those are the 8 TEL approaches suggested by Walsh in 2014. But now it's 2022. Of course, there are many new TEL approaches that is left for a teacher to explore. So I hope that when you have time, you browse, you see ano yung pinakamagandang gamitin ko sa field. Dahil kung hindi, chances are we'll be left with the times and baka ando na tayo sa part na we may be a bit incompetent. Okay? That's why learning is a forever process, or learning is a lifelong process. This goes to teachers as well. We learn new ways to teach. And these 8 TEL approaches are just the baseline. Nowadays, hanap pa tayo ng mas bago. Okay? And with that ends our recording. So I hope you have a good day, and I'll see you all in our synchronous class. Bye!